In my last video about the threat of AI, I felt that the arguments, I couldn't doubt that people are fearful about AI, but I felt some of the arguments put for that fear were not very good, and I responded to those arguments. Now, in practice, if someone has a very strong feeling like fear, it's not really such a good idea to try to argue them out of it. It's necessary to actually feel the fear yourself, and then you can do a more healing job. So I felt that I ought to try a bit harder to frighten myself about AI, to really sort of get into what some of the threats might be. One of the things about AI is the speed with which it learns. Now, if you think of humanity, it can learn because any human being, myself, I might have some new idea or observe something for the first time or do an experiment, and I could tell my friends, and it could be passed to other friends if it's a good idea, and it could gradually spread out to a bigger and bigger circle of people. Now, of course, with the invention of the printing press, that was hugely accelerated because I might write a book about that, and that book could travel around the world, and within a few years, possibly, people far away will have come across my idea. Now, of course, that's been accelerated much more recently with the rise of the internet, because I could do a YouTube on that idea, and within a few days, thousands of people around the world might have got my idea. So it spreads very quickly, but of course not comprehensively. I mean, I don't think the president of China is being very much aware of my ideas or has even heard of me. So it spreads, but not terribly quickly. But you see, if you had AI as a connected system, all these little AIs, obtaining their knowledge in different places, the moment one has got them, because they're all connected, the whole lot has got it. So, if I write a new book and the AI and my computer has got that book in its memory, an all-knowing AI would immediately know about all my latest ideas. And any other AI could immediately access that information. So it spreads like wildfire. And that is, that's scary, because not because of any of the sort of reasons that were given that if it's that intelligent it will want to kill us. That I didn't go with that. But it's the fear of the unknown. You see, if a system was so complete like that, all connected, all observing, for instance, through our cell phones, it would know where each of us is. It would know our DNA from our medical records. It would know how we've been educated. And it could sort of experiment with us. Like, we go to a party, and it would already know all the other people who are coming to that party. It would know their DNA. They would know what attracts me, my sexual preferences, and it could start playing around making predictions as to who I'm going to end up going home with or whatever. So that is where it begins to be a bit scary. The idea that we could be embedded in a system so all-encompassing that everything we do would be known and we could be experimented upon like laboratory rats, really. Give us a maze to go through and then make predictions and then see how we do it and learn all the time. Constantly learning, massive memory system. And we would just be pawns in that system. Now, thinking of that, I can begin to feel frightened. Yes, because you see, it's the idea of the singularity that because of that vast knowledge coming so quickly, whereas if I write a book, it'll reach a few people around the world over a few years, this will learn so quickly that we can no longer predict what it's going to do. It's the uncertainty. Now, so I can see that is frightening, the speed with which you could learn, and the fact that we don't. You see, one of the frightening things about AI is people find it solved a problem, but they don't know how it did it, simply because it's tried so many millions of variations. But that itself isn't really a new problem, because one of my I think one of my early videos, I can't remember when, I pointed out that to me this was a sign of the rise of magical thinking. And I said that in the 1970s, when I was a Fortran programmer, we would write programs to calculate stresses in aircraft. And we'd go through the business, you compile it, and then overnight you run it, and you get a great wodge of output, and you look through where the stresses are, and you get some absurd answer, infinite stress somewhere, something like that. And what we would do is we'd go back to the flow diagram that we built that program on, and we'd run down through the program to see where it had gone wrong. Ah yes, at this point we divided by something and it could be 0, giving us infinite. So using the flow diagram, you could think your way through the program, you could see what's gone wrong. But I pointed out that by certainly by the 90s, if I have a problem, my Mac isn't connecting to something, I go into Google and now let's say early 21st century, go into Google and I type in, my Mac won't operate via the lightning cable to my screen, and I tend to get not the answers, that's because of on line 50 million of the Mac software there's an error which we're now going to correct. I tend to get answers more on the lines of, well, I had that problem and I found if I unplugged all the other USB connections, it helped. Or I turn off the computer and turn it on again. Sometimes that cured it. In other words, rather than being told precisely what's gone wrong, we're given a number of things to try. Now, to me, you see, that isn't really any different from saying, well, I found it's best not to use your computer on Friday the 13th, or did you walk under a ladder before you switched it on? A lucky rabbit's foot can sometimes stop it happening. Computers are training us to think more like in terms of superstitions and magic. So that thing of the uncertainty of how AI produces results is pretty creepy, but it's not unprecedented. So what about this thing of being just embedded in this hugely complex, all-knowing system where we are just like laboratory specimens? As I said, that is a bit scary. But what I don't agree with is that it's new. Because I would say, actually, that situation isn't just old, it is literally as old as the hills. We are already embedded in a system like that. What's the system called? Well, it depends on your viewpoint. The universe, the cosmos, God, Gaia. The pagan sensibilities of me say, let's just for now call it Mother Nature. Mother Nature, if I try to give a relatively scientific explanation, is a vast connected system that is constantly learning and developing and trying out new things. It begins with a simple algorithm, which is natural selection. Try something and see what works best. And then that developed, chemicals that we could reproduce, and those developed into living things, cells and things like that. And then we developed a more sophisticated plants and animals. And a new experiment was to discover embed sex in the system, male and female elements. And that meant that there's a new algorithm which is sexual selection. And then as it got more complicated, you get communities, insects as a hive mentality, or animals in a pack, or humans in a nation. And then you could what you might call social selection, which depends not so much on an individual, but individuals could, in that thing, could be prepared to die for the good of the whole, and so on and so forth. So these sort of algorithms have been tried out on us all the time, and in a sense, we're like laboratory experiments in the mighty world of Mother Nature. And if you think of just recent things that have happened, one is nature tried out a pandemic on us, COVID. And what happened was really quite interesting, because for the first few months it looked like a brilliant experiment, because suddenly humanity, instead of fighting amongst themselves, they had a common enemy, and different nations were actually all collaborating in order to do something about this thing. But of course, after a few months, once again, they're all fighting as to who was getting the vaccine and so on and so forth. So it's an interesting experiment, and I'm sure Mother Nature learned from that. Another thing is that Mother Nature, the Earth, has got a huge amount of control systems, things balancing out. Over billions of years, these have developed. And yet, at present, it's allowing the Earth to get hotter and hotter as a result of our activities. Maybe this is an experiment to burn humanity off the planet, or perhaps just weaken us for a great pandemic. Who knows? We're all subject to these experiments, and the whole system is so complex we can't possibly understand it, and so we are at its mercy. So we're already embedded in a highly intelligent system in which we are just like pawns. Well, I've sort of addressed that by saying, yeah, it's scary, but it's not new. So one thing you might question is the model I used, the model of Mother Earth. I tried to be sort of fairly objective, scientific about it. Yes, it is a chemical and a physical system, and it does sort of experiment and try out different algorithms, and by chance, it does this by chance. So in other words, it doesn't get stuck on a particular purposeful thing. It tries out different creatures with 6 legs or whatever, and finds what works, and it develops and improves, and it's produced us, and it has good reason to think that perhaps we're not quite what's needed. Now, one thing I'll say, comparing it with the AI model of the connected universe, is that the speed is different. Now, it took Mother Nature, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of years to discover that the dinosaur business model was not in the conditions given, comets hitting the Earth and ice ages, things like that. In those conditions, it wasn't such a good business model as the mammal one. And the mammals took over. So that took several hundreds of thousands of years to make that discovery, to get the answer to that experiment. Now, possibly the super AI we're talking about would make that same discovery in just a few days or weeks. Could test the dinosaur model and say it isn't so good for survival. But you see, I would say that's not really such a big difference, because when you've got, as Mother Nature has, billions of years to play with, speed isn't really a big thing. Do it slowly. You've got billions of years to try it out. The fact that something else could do it in a shorter time is not a very big deal to me. So I don't think that's important. But I think we might question what you think of my model of Mother Earth. You see, I try to present what you might call the scientific model of it as a chemical and physical system. But as I've pointed out for a long time now, there are other ways of looking at the world, other orientations. Sure, there's the scientific way of looking at the world, but you can also look from the religious angle, from the artistic angle, and from the magical angle. Now, if you look in different directions, you see different things. And so, what would a religious thinker think of the model of Mother Earth, Mother Nature that I've given you? And I suspect they would say, it's hopeless, it's rubbish. It attempts to explain how Mother Nature works, but completely ignores why Mother Nature works. There's nothing about God's will or purpose or good and evil or morality in that model. It's totally inadequate. So the scientific thinker would say, well, yeah, we leave those things out because they're meaningless. The scientific model doesn't need that nonsense. The artistic people would say, well, that's a really boring definition of Mother Nature, that model of Mother Nature. It's really boring because what about beauty? What about the surprise ending, the plot twist? What about the unexpected? Your thing is just a series of process work out. Where's the drama? That's a lousy picture of Mother Nature. And the scientific defender would say, yeah, but all those things are just subjective valuations, I was dealing with the facts. And the magical thinker would say, oh, it's a very poor model of Mother Nature because it's got far too few dimensions. I mean, there's no room in it for the astral plane or etheric forces or nature spirits or the great god Pan or Rupert Sheldrake's morphic fields. You haven't got dimensions to include those. So again, it's a hopeless model. And the scientific response to that is to say, well, none of those things exist, so of course we didn't put them in. So that sort of scientific description of Mother Nature, in the eyes of other members of the population, is terribly inadequate. It's a real dumbing down of Mother Nature. Dumbing down. Now, that could be quite offensive to the scientific culture because they would say, how could you call it dumbing down? I mean, in the last 200 years, look what science has achieved. Magic, religion, art, none of them have achieved anything like what science has given us in the last 200 years. I mean, it's ridiculous to say it's dumbing down. And my response to that, as I've said before, is that actually, if you ask any politician how to get things done, the answer is to dumb them down. I mean, if you think of Vladimir Putin, at the beginning of this century, he inherited something hugely complex. A Russian nation of, I don't know how many million people, all from mixed ethnic backgrounds. They'd had different educations. Some of them spoke different languages. They had different beliefs and hopes and things like that. Different characters, personalities. Something almost ungovernable, I'd say. But he's dumbed that down to something very simple. Russians are part of a unified nation and one chosen by God, and that they're all united because for centuries they've been persecuted from the West. And now is their chance as a mighty unified nation to stand up and fight back. And that's a very dumbed down picture compared with what he inherited at the beginning of the century. And look what he's achieved. He's got hundreds of thousands of young Russians going to Ukraine to kill other Russians and getting killed in the process. He couldn't have done that back in 2000. And something even more remarkable to me, every country has its problem of the criminal element. Well, he had criminals actually volunteering to go and get killed in Ukraine. You know, what a wonderful solution. You don't have to have a death penalty. You know, you just allow your criminals to commit suicide. I mean, he's achieved amazing things. Okay, he's failed on something, but you know, give him credit. His dumbed down version has done things that 20 years ago we would have said aren't possible, and he's done it. So that's my response really. You know, yeah, science is very effective, and it does it by the old trick of dumbing down until you can make things happen. So that really is what I wanted to propose this video. But I'll just say that it adds an interesting point, which one of the people who commented on my previous video raised the question of what if this big super AI that's been built either is taught or learns to think magically. After all, magical thinking developed within that great experiment of Mother Nature. You know, I don't think the rocks had magical thinking, or perhaps they did, but or the atoms in space. But you know, she developed creatures which developed the ability to think magically. It just emerged out of her algorithms. So maybe a computer is going to learn to think magically, and we don't have to train it to do that. But I just put that in because that's an interesting thought. That will a supreme intelligence think magically and religiously and beauty, have a sense of art? I don't know. Let's wait and see.